Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio, so today we've got a couple of pretty exciting cards to talk about. Yeah, I know my voice has not fully recovered after the World Championships. Well, that was ironic. But you know what? It's good enough. There's exciting new cards, and we need to have a little bit of a chat. No, we're not going to be talking about the Incandescent Arcana and I today, or at least in this video, although, come on. Look how beautiful it is. But we've got ourselves a new Radiant Pokémon, Radiant Alakazam, which we were actually warned about yesterday, and we now can see, and that's lovely. And we knew there was one Pokemon V that had yet to be revealed, and it has now been revealed. It's Magearna. Yay! I'm not particularly a big Magearna fan or not. I'm going to leave it up to you how excited you are. But I do believe that this Radiant Alakazam is very exciting, so this seems like a very good place to start. As always, shout out to the lovely Antoine Boulet for providing the translations, though it is Antoine and myself who did the translations here, which is kind of fun. I like being able to do them myself a lot of the time. That makes me very, very happy. Though the complex ones I'm always going to check with Antoine because Antoine is way better at this than I am. So what we've got here is 130 HP, which is about right. But we've got a rather nice ability. Once during your turn, you may move up to 2 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another one of their Pokemon. And this is sneaky great. Not good, not alright, great. You see, we've seen this kind of thing before. A lot of you guys might remember that a while ago we had Absol. I believe it was Absol from Roaring Skies, if I remember correctly. And this Absol had an ability whereby when you played it from your hand to your bench, you could move 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of their Pokemon. This saw a bunch of play and saw a bunch of love. And won a bunch of games. And the reason is, sometimes you're just not doing quite enough damage. This lets you do... Now, I know you've got to have damage on the field beforehand, right? But it means you can get those KOs that you're just a little bit away from. And that's a really big deal. So let's take something like Greedent. There's a Greedent coming in Lost Origin, of which I am a rather huge fan. And that Greedent says that you deal 210 damage... because you've got to discard your whole hand, and if you discard at least 5 cards, as in you had at least 5 cards in your hand, you deal 210 damage. 210 damage is not enough to get the baseline Pokemon V of 220, so you need an extra 10 damage, and sure, sometimes Choice Belt will work, but Choice Belt won't always work. You don't always have a Choice Belt, so this will work. And yes, you've got to have damage elsewhere on the field, fine, I get that, I understand that. But the fact of the matter is, you know those early turns where you don't really deal a huge amount of damage? Well, now, dealing 10 or 20 damage in the early game can actually be, like, really genuinely huge, because that can be that 10 or 20 damage that you need on a Pokemon in the later game. It means you don't have to get that setup damage on the right Pokemon. You can get it onto any Pokemon, and then just move it over later in the game when it's a little bit more convenient. This is absolutely brilliant. It is ever so slightly worse than Absol, because Absol was, of course, 30 or 3 damage counters rather than 2. But the big difference here is this is literally every turn. I mean, let's say you've got a Pokemon that's spreading 20 damage. I mean, something like Inteleon, for instance, which we do see played a huge amount, does 20 damage to the bench. Well, now, just wait till next turn, move that 20 back to the active. And you can just keep doing this over and over and over again. This is one of those Pokemon that... It's kind of like if you've played with Absol, you will already realise how gosh darn good this is. But if you didn't play with cards like Absol in the past, it's kind of hard to explain quite how amazing this card can be. Because it's every turn, and it's that little bit of extra damage. Sometimes... it's actually really kind of fun because you're doing too much damage. You're dealing 240 and you only need to do 220. You know, let's say I'm attacking with a Greedent into a Luminion. I only need to do 170, but I'm actually doing more. Well, if there's already any damage on the Luminion, I can move a little bit of that off before I get too much damage on. If there's damage on before you're getting a KO, you can actually move that damage off so that it's there to be used later on in the game. It's so good. Now, a couple of notes on Alakazam, because this is pretty important. Yes, it is a rule box Pokemon. So yes, Path to the Peak will turn this off, which is kind of annoying. Remember, this will survive the next rotation. It's also worth noting that Radiant Pokemon are one of any type in your deck. So if you want to play something like a Radiant Greninja for the draw power, you're not able to play this as well. If you're playing one of those Radiant Charizard decks that we saw doing very well at the World Championships, you cannot then also play this in that deck, because you've already chosen your Radiant Pokemon. There are choices to be made. You will have to make them. Remember, one of the other Radiant Pokemon in this particular set is Radiant Serena. That's one that heals 20 from all of your Pokemon once during your turn. So, yeah. There are going to be decks that really want to play that. And I leave it up to you, ladies and gentlemen, but it is at least there. Also, shout out to Pokemon for once again finding a way to get Alakazam into the Pokemon TCG without using Kadabra. Because, of course, Alakazam is a Stage 2, but all Radiant Pokemon are basic. So that's Radiant Alakazam. I'm giving it 5 Wassies. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's one of the best Radiant Pokemon we've seen, and I'm not sure if it's going to unseat things like Charizard and Greninja. That remains to be seen, but I've seen enough moving damage counters abilities being borderline broken to know that being able to do this every turn is ridiculous. I haven't even told you about the attack yet. I'm giving it 5 Wassies based on the ability. I've not even told you about the attack. The attack is 1 Psychic, 1 Colorless, 20 damage for each card in your opponent's hand. Potentially phenomenal, but also awkward. Because you see, it's not up to you, it's up to your opponent. And they can lower their hand size to try and foil you if they wish, which is a little bit of a problem. And similarly, it's a Psychic Energy and a Colorless, so it's only really used in Psychic decks, and your opponent can try and foil you. But if there's ever a situation where there's a Pokemon deck that really wants to have a gigantic hand, something like Unknown Hand before it got banned and expanded, you know what, ladies and gentlemen? This is a phenomenal counter. Not loving the attack. I think it's useful, but I think it's going to be few and far between. But I am absolutely loving the ability. But what about Magearna V? How much am I loving Magearna V? And the answer is, it's alright. We got 210 HP, which is on the lower end for Pokemon V. Well, it's fine, but we go up to 220, so we generally want to see 220. My boy Greedent will love it if you are playing this. And what we've got here are a couple of attacks. First attack here, again, translations of Mantuan and myself. 1 Metal Energy, 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. It's weak. It's pretty weak. I mean, back when we were all using Mew to protect our benches, we had a single Colorless Energy attack that could drop 3 damage counters. And to be clear, dropping 3 damage counters is huge, because against Pokemon like Mew or Manaphy, although I do like to refer to Manaphy as New Mew, what we basically got here is a way to block damage. And of course, what we see from Magearna is damage. But if you're dropping damage counters, you get around it. So like Mew's attack was better than this. Yeah, sure, there are going to be times where your opponent doesn't have a bench barrier, and where your opponent has got a Pokemon with 10, 20 or 30 damage remaining before they're KO'd, and on those turns, this is going to be amazing. The thing is, you've got to be paying it for something else, ladies and gentlemen. Like, you're not going to be playing Magearna just for this first attack. So what does the second attack do? 2 metal, 1 colorless, 100 damage. If this Pokemon has any special energy attached to it, this attack does 120 more damage. Oh, yeah, that's really good. And part of the reason it's good is incredibly simple. You get a KO on Pokemon V. Like I've told you in this video that 220 is generally the baseline for KOing Pokemon V. Well, good news. If you whack a special energy on, this will do it. And in terms of the energy cost, don't forget, being a metal Pokemon, we've still got Metal Sorcerer until the rotation hits, which will attach an energy from the discard. We've still got Bronzong, and this one will survive the rotation, that will move energy around so you can bench this and move the energy straight over to it, which is obviously really, really, really rather good. And I kind of love this, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is brilliant. I think this is going to see a bunch of play. And yeah, this is cool. And then, of course, you need a special energy on there, but this gives you an excuse to play stuff like Capture Energy, which lets you search for a basic and bench it. So, I kind of like this. If you're playing stuff like Capture Energy anyway, and there's a decent chance that you will be in a bunch of decks, and you're playing that Metal Acceleration, you got a basic Pokemon that can one-hit KO Pokemon V. I kind of like this. I'm only giving it between 3 and 4 Wassies, because if you're playing Metal, there are other ways to KO Pokemon V, and that is quite important. But the first attack is sneaky useful in some games, and you can one-hit KO Pokemon V, and that's pretty good. But to be honest with you, one of the ways you can KO Pokemon V better is using Zacian, which does do 230 for free energy. But do remember that Zacian's ability lets you attach energy to itself, and then you can use Bronzong to move it over to the beginner, if that's the kind of thing you're into. So I did warn you we were going to have 1 new Pokemon V and 1 new Radiant Pokemon revealed last night. They were. I'm happy, and now it's over to you guys. Do you like Radiant Alakazam as much as I do? Do you think it's phenomenal, or am I overreacting? Let me know in the comment section, would you? Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWassy. That's where we talk Pokemon and card games and Pokemon card games and all kinds of fun things. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel. You can get some bonus podcasts where I talk about fun things. This week I'm talking all about my Worlds trip. And we can give shout outs to people like the lovely Edgar Menares, who is one of our supporters and is a very lovely person indeed. Thank you for the support, Edgar, and thank you for being a rather lovely person. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.